In this episode of the Well Aware podcast, we're joined by Sarah Benton, author of Parents in Recovery, Navigating a Sober Family Lifestyle, who also serves as a licensed clinician and chief clinical officer at Waterview Behavioral Health. For a thoughtful conversation on recovery and family life, we'll explore the unique challenges parents in recovery face as they balance sobriety, family life, identity, and long-term healing. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Well Aware podcast. I'm Dr. Lauren, and I have the pleasure of being the Chief Medical Officer here at Aware Recovery Care. And today I'm so excited because we are joined by our good friend, Sarah Allen Benton, who is a licensed clinician and an author who brings just a really thoughtful, compassionate perspective to conversations really that we don't have enough of, specifically around recovery, parenting, and long-term healing. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Where does this podcast find you?
I am podcasting from Connecticut.
Awesome. Snowy and cold Connecticut, I'm assuming.
It is. I mean, if you like to ski, it's good, and I do. For those that are not a fan of the snow, it has been quite the winter.
Yes, for sure. I hear you. Well, guys, Sarah has spent more than 15 years working with individuals and families impacted by substance use. And just to give you a little bit of background, she is Chief Clinical Officer at Waterview Behavioral Health, and she's also the author of a really important book called Parents in Recovery, Navigating a Sober Family Lifestyle. And this book really brings together her clinical insight, lived experience, and just a deep understanding of family systems. Sarah was also part of the Aware Recovery team starting in 2016. She held a variety of different really crucial roles through 2023. And, as we dive in, Sarah, can you start just by telling our listeners what led you to write Parents in Recovery, and why does this conversation feel so important now?
Well, I can tell you that, I wrote a book in 2009, Understanding the High Functioning Alcoholic, and I never thought I'd write another book again. It just felt like something that had to be a passion project and something that I was fully committed to. So unless it felt like this is, there's some huge gap in literature, I don't want to just put something that is already out there so frequently. I happened in a bookstore to be browsing the memoir section, and I came across the book by Cindy House called Mother Noise. And I just was reading the summary, and it was just talking about how she was struggling as a parent in recovery of when to tell her son about why she was sober. He knew that she didn't drink and use substances, but the why. And it kind of hit me like, oh, she called it the telling. And I thought to myself, are there books about, being a parent in recovery? Like, this was a memoir, but I was curious, like, are there nonfiction books around this topic? So I started researching it, and there just was not much at all. And if there was something, it was very, very heavily rooted in 12 steps. So, and it was just targeted towards women and mothers. So I felt like, I think I'm feeling a calling, because I knew it involved a lot of work. So I was having mixed feelings, like, oh, wow, I know there's this need, but oh my gosh, it's so much work. So I pitched it to a publishing company, and a couple months later, they agreed to publish it. But it really was something for me that was a personal and professional interest, because I had felt that being a parent had led to another level of weight to my recovery in different ways. I felt that sometimes things were harder, sometimes things were easier, but there was a unique lifestyle that I was starting to see as I observed other parents who weren't necessarily in recovery from a substance use disorder. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to capture that.
I love that. And I love you talking about kind of that gap of there being some literature maybe for women specifically, which leads me to think probably a gap for male parenting.
Yep.
In your book, you're very specific that this is not a how to parent book. And it's also not an exclusively how to get sober book. What gap were you seeing that made you feel that this guide, kind of combining parenting and staying sober, was needed? It sounds like part of it was just a lack of really seeing any good literature out there.
I think there well, there, for those that I interviewed, there's over 400 years of recovery represented in the pages of my book. So I had known just through clients I had worked with and also peers I had gotten sober with and also become parents with, that there was these unspoken ways that we patched our recovery together, that we like kind of meandered and shifted and shape shifted really at different phases of our parenting and different stages of recovery. So some people got sober before becoming parents, some got sober after. It looked different for them. And there wasn't really a field guide or a shortcut where all of this wisdom and information was put together. It was a lot of word of mouth, a lot of just things you learned along the way, have fumbling. And so what I wanted to do was really provide a shortcut for parents who are navigating, and I call it a lifestyle intentionally, because I think when people first get sober, it's okay, I just stopped using, drinking, whatever their substance of choice. But over time, you start to see that it's a way of life. It's not just this substance you put down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talk a lot about parents in recovery. What do you think makes their experience distinct from just recovery alone or parenting alone? What are some salient aspects that blend the two together that's kind of unique to that role as a recovering parent?
Well, one thing is that self-care is not optional. And I found that I did a control group where I interviewed parents who were not in recovery. And I started to ask them some of the questions of like, are there things you do for yourself? How important do you think that self-care is? And how important do you view self-care and certain wellness and balance and routine and recovery focus is for those who are parents in recovery? And it was interesting because they viewed it as almost optional for them, but not optional for the parents who were in recovery, because to them, the consequences were so dire. I don't necessarily fully agree, because I think every parent needs to recharge their battery, and there's other issues besides substance use that are going on for people. There's other addictive behaviors, there's medical issues, right? But I do think that it's not optional, in the sense that we must put our recovery first, even as a parent. And it becomes more and more challenging with that other layer of responsibility for other humans and for our schedules and for the things that we, for those of us that got sober before having children, there was freedom in that. Like, oh, I feel like going to a meeting, or, oh, I feel like going to do this, or, I really I need to go to therapy, or this and that. And then you start to hear, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Oh my gosh, I don't have enough time. Or my children's schedules. And you start to hear all the excuses and reasons why people just slowly put themselves out of the equation, to a point where those parents that are not in recovery, I start to hear things like, oh, my me time is when I have a drink. And it's like, if your only me time is poisoning yourself, that's probably not good. And also, if your schedule is so burdensome and so packed that you can't manage it without drinking or using substances, we all need to look at that.
Right. Yeah. You talk a lot about sustainable self-care, which I think is super important too, because it's one thing to, dedicate a spa day or something, but like it's a different thing to integrate small things that are sustainable, that you can balance with recovery, with parenting. What would you say like sustainable self-care looks like? What are some tips you would be giving to folks, both in recovery, of course, and parents who are not? That's things that are refreshing while being sustainable with all these competing priorities.
Well, one of the number one things I see is and I think we see it with New Year's resolutions, but but when we think of like a pie chart and what our life is divided into when we're awake, we have work, we have different domains that we look at. And the wellness domains are a huge part of recovery, right? But even just for people that are not in recovery, just a living person, you have work, possibly, right? Could be that you're a stay-at-home parent. That is a huge obligation. It is a huge job. You have family, friends, social, spiritual, health, just all the different areas of your life. And so if you're going to add in because it is adding, right? Whether it's therapy, there's a million things you can do for self-care, soul care, whatever you want to call it, right? Whether it's religious, spiritual, whether it's taking a run, whether it's a hike, listening to a podcast, like doing yoga, all the millions of things that you can choose from, going to a self-help meeting, that takes time, right? So if you haven't actually removed something from your full pie, then like, where does that come from? So what I often see is people start adding on, I'm going to just start doing this in recovery or in the new year or whenever, in this new stage of my life. But then they realize it's not sustainable because they actually don't have time for it, because they haven't pulled away. So there have to be some no's, there have to be some boundaries, and there has to be some understanding from other family members and friends and loved ones. So some of this is also about asking for support, asking for help, asking for the gift of time.
Sure.
Can family watch your children? Can your loved one, can your partner, can a babysitter, can you do virtual where you don't have as much of a need for childcare? Like, how can you meander and navigate these different time conundrums, right? So some of this is about swallowing your pride a little bit and saying, I need some me time, and would you be willing to? And I've seen people get really creative, like time swaps with kids. Like, I'll watch your kids, this day and you can watch, and you swap. So there's just all these different ways. Even having a parent come over and having the kids play, that can allow parents to have some breathing room, to have some adult conversation. So It doesn't have to be the deepest, wildest thing you've ever seen. But I have to say, in a post-pandemic world, there's almost fewer excuses to not feed your battery, because there's so many virtual options now. And not that everybody loves virtual, but I have to say, there's, many church services, synagogue, Buddhist, like all, whatever floats your boat, self-help meetings, therapy. There's a lot more that can be done, and access to resources, even exercise classes, yoga classes, again, depending on the age of your child, right? But there are some things that before the pandemic, I would say parents felt like, I have to bring my child with me. There needs to be childcare at this place.
Sure.
So, I think that we live in a world now where there is a little bit more breathing room, for us to feed our battery and recharge our soul. But you have to be willing to make those shifts and changes and pull away a little bit from that, that pie chart.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of it, what you're saying, is being really thoughtful and intentional with your time pie, and realizing, there's only 24 hours in a day. I saw this hilarious meme on Instagram the other day with a guy who he had like a toddler, an infant, like two older kids, and it was like something like, he was saying, like, I literally don't know what I did with my time before kids. It was just a 24/7 vacation. And then you have kids and you're suddenly like, oh my gosh, all this time is spoken for and accounted for. And to your point, being really intentional about setting that time aside. And I imagine you talk about this too in the book, not feeling guilty about that.
Right.
A lot of mom guilt or dad guilt of like, oh gosh, I'm taking this hour away from my kids. But I mean, your message is really like, you need to take that time to be a good parent, right? I mean, that's kind of the basic
Right.
Maybe
Well, I mean, we're not good parents if we're completely fried. The candle's been burnt at both ends. We are not at all. I mean, that's not great time. Like, your kids probably don't even want to be around you if you're that crabby and and like strung out from everything, right? So some of it is about the quality of time we spend. And I mean, honestly, the parental guilt, we have to work on that ourselves. Like, where that stems from. And also, our children's perceptions they're also used to what they're used to. And so, for example, I can use my daughter as an example. She is used to me needing downtime, right? So if we're overscheduled, that is really not, I can't live my life consistently overscheduled. Sure, yes, there's always a week or, something here and there where things are just wild. But that's not a constant baseline for me of the way I live my life. My nervous system won't allow that for me. I'm in recovery. I'm not, it doesn't end well for me if I don't listen to that. So my daughter's grown up knowing that I need need downtime. And she's honestly, I think if we lead by example, I don't know if there's a perception that we're harming our children by saying we need to do things for ourselves, but we're actually showing them what it means to care for ourselves. So then they start to role model that. My daughter will mimic things I say, like my social battery is is dead. She'll say those things to me back. She'll say I need downtime. Like like I've role modeled it, and then she has recognized that in herself, which is not something I ever at her age at 14 had ever recognized. But again, I think that we have to consider a reframe on this, that, you know, the time that you're taking, they're noticing it, but it's not always a bad thing.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I love, we all know, and if you're in the addiction field, that addiction is very hereditary. There's a large genetic load, genetic component. But I feel like not enough people talk about the fact that recovery can be hereditary. Recovery can be passed down. And it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of this, what seems like maybe simple, healthy modeling can really powerfully influence how our children grow up with self-care tips that can maybe not 100% protect them, but at least insulate them from learning how to deal with challenges in general.
Well, first of all, I love that idea of passing recovery down. And I have seen intergenerational recovery, like family, that it's been passed down. Sometimes the addiction comes and then the recovery comes quicker than it would have because they've seen recovery modeled in their house. So that's really an awesome thing too. But the copycat behavior can be a positive, and the coping skills. So for a lot of us, we started to learn things when there was a crisis. And that's the part that is interesting to me, even as a therapist, that the time that people start to learn basic coping skills is when there's a crisis, whether it's mental health or substance use disorders. People learn the most about themselves in different forms of treatment, whether it's outpatient therapy or group therapy or in-home or residential or IOP, like whatever. People learn when there's often a crisis of some sort. And so I know there's been some shifts in, increasing awareness around kids learning coping skills and such, but I still don't feel like it's baked in to school systems and to our society. I think there's other cultures that have baked it in a little better than us, but we are a culture of do more, addicted to being busy, and that you should be being productive at all times. And granted, I'm not perfect on that end, and I pressure myself sometimes, like force myself to do the downtime thing, but I need that. And I think most people do, they just may not recognize it. Or you have to also ask yourself the question, like, what is it that prevents you from being able to sit? Like, why can't you sit still and relax a little bit? Like, what is that motor that constantly is revving you? And is it stressing your family and your children out, right? Because kids also don't need to be doing things 24/7.
Right. Yes. As I can well attest to my 5-year-old daughter, who's been sleeping on the couch since probably 9 or 10 a.m. She's got a little bit of a fever, but yes, they need the downtime. Let's pivot a little bit. I want to ask you about sober socializing as parents. Parents have school events, family gatherings, holidays. I mean, endless social situations where let's say it's a parenting event, but substances may be present as well. I'm thinking our kids have like a charity auction at the end of February, big charity event for the school, but there's an open bar, they're auctioning off different types of liquors and stuff. So what would you say, like, how can parents be present to any degree in those kind of events without compromising their recovery, or at least trying to insulate it?
Well, I can say that that's certainly a topic that comes up a lot, especially because most of the time people like attracts like. And so parents who were, before, say you were a parent that hung out with a heavier drinking crowd and then you got sober, like that's your social circle. And it can be cultural in the sense of your family. It can also be cultural where the neighborhood you live in. I interviewed people from all over the country, and I can tell you that there are different school systems and different towns and cities that have differing drinking cultures.
Sure.
Really. Like, for example, I was talking to my friends on the West Coast. They were talking a lot about the alcohol at the young children's birthday parties. I haven't seen that as much where I live in
Hmm.
Connecticut.
Hmm.
Could be the
Yeah.
part of Connecticut I'm in, but I'm saying, like, or maybe I'm not invited to those events. No, I'm just kidding. But I even asked around to other parents because I was trying to check myself, like, is this something that's a cultural norm that I'm not aware of? But no, um so it tends to be that you find, and I know when I was drinking, I found the people wherever I lived that drank the way I did.
Hmm.
And so it can be hard when you change, right? When you shift and change and you're starting to either be sober curious, or you're starting to want to cut back, or you're starting to be sober, it can be really hard because other people didn't sign up to change. And they
Sure.
can also be uncomfortable with your shift. That was one of the most shocking things for me, was when I got sober and I was 27, was the response to it. Like,
Mm.
while there was an understanding that I needed to do something about my drinking, there was some feedback I got that being sober seemed very extreme, and
Mm.
that, um mind you, I had spent 4 years trying to control my drinking and failed. So it had been a long process of, and quite defeating. Um and so there was some pushback because I was the connector. I was a person who brought a lot of people together. And
Hmm.
so when you pull out of your role, even if it's positive because you want to get healthy or this and that, I mean, I've seen people that want to train for a marathon and get pushed back because they're not drinking, nothing to do with having a drinking problem.
Hmm.
So change, you become an unintentional mirror to other people's substance use.
Hmm.
And so there can be pushback. Um, I do think that, the first year of recovery is a really vulnerable time, and it's not that you can't go to those events, but it's also, do you have other ways to bond with your friends and with the other parents? Are there things you can do that are just not going to rotate so much around substances or drinking?
Right.
And do you just have to say no because that's where you're at? Does that mean forever? Not necessarily, but you are more vulnerable in the first year. That's a fact.
Yeah.
There are certain events I couldn't go to till I was like 5 years sober. And that was just based on my history at those events. So you really have to check in with yourself, talk to sober supports, talk to your therapist, talk to coaches, like whatever it may be, and really, like, be honest with yourself, right? About what is the best choice.
Hmm.
Um, and also, can you create, and start doing things for your child's birthday or for events that give other creative ideas to parents that show that the event doesn't have to rotate around substances and lead by example in some way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I love that theme. And really it's a theme you see in recovery, but it kind of translated to a different venue, i.e. the theme of like find your people, finding new people, being thoughtful about the venues you're in. But you're right that it's not talked a lot about in the setting of parenting. So I love your ability to translate really just like key pivotal recovery themes, but what does this look like with a different hat on being a parent? And all of these things come up so
It's
much.
disguised even more too, because and I know there was a huge, probably prior to the pandemic, there was a huge, like, mommy drinking culture thing, and sippy cups are for Chardonnay, and I'm a good mom, and all of this justification because, like, I'm not alone, right? I'm with other mothers doing this, or I'm with other fathers doing this, and so you just feel, again, part of what's the cultural norm.
Yeah.
And when somebody starts to question that, step back from that, or there's research, I mean, I think the Surgeon General guidelines have completely changed. But it
Hmm.
used to be, right, that a certain amount of alcohol was considered to be, antioxidants and stuff that you could get from grape juice. But now it's like any amount of alcohol is not necessarily good for you. Um so there's just, over time, there are certain drugs that were legal, right? And now they're not. Like, there's just different research over time. And I think there's become more of a wellness culture than we had in the past.
Yes.
And hopefully this is giving people a right to go out and drink a non-alcoholic beer or, have a Shirley Temple and not get a million questions, right? Because I do think that people who are listening to this that are on the other side and know somebody that is just like not wanting to drink when they're out, just letting people do what they're going to do and not drilling them every time that they say they don't want to have a drink.
Sure. Yeah. 100%. 100%. If parents in recovery are listening now, this has been so fun, by the way, and I could talk to you for like hours. And thinking about our time and zooming in kind of as we summarize here, if a parent in recovery is listening now and feeling overwhelmed or discouraged, what's like the one key message you hope they take away from our conversation today?
Well, first of all, you're not alone. I mean, speaking of recovery being passed down, there's about 23 million Americans that are in recovery, and you don't necessarily meet them when you're hanging out with people that are drinking, right? So there's this whole underground culture of people that are in recovery that are supporting each other. And if you go to the right places, you're going to meet the right people. But it's amazing how, just the little shifts and changes you make will lead you to meet new people. And there's like this path towards connecting and realizing, who you're meant to be with in your life in this season, because it can change and that's okay.
Yes. As Fleetwood Mac said, right? Can I handle the seasons of my life? Great song about recovery too, in fact. This has been so fun. Speaking of not being alone, where can our listeners learn more about your work and also find your book, Parents in Recovery? Where should they go to see more about you?
Well, my personal website is bentonb.com. And I have information, resources about the topics of both high functioning alcoholics and parents in recovery. I also have a Psychology Today blog called The High Functioning Alcoholic, and I've done a Parents in Recovery series, which has been really fun. My book is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and through the publisher, Bloomsbury.com as well.
Awesome. Such an evergreen message. So folks listening, make sure you check out Sarah. In fact, I'm thinking of a few people I'm going to forward this podcast to when it comes out to learn more about your book and your message. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. Your perspective and your work are so meaningful. And, on behalf of women, fellow parents, I just thank you so much for getting out such a needed and timely message. And I know this conversation will resonate with so many parents and families. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again on the Well Aware podcast. You can get this wherever you find your podcast.